Okay, I believe we're about ready to begin here, if you guys are. Okay, hello everyone and welcome to Concordia University's Fourth Space. Thank you for joining us for today's event, Jekhipe Unity, part of the ongoing Romani-Translation Summer Institute. To help situate you, we are streaming to YouTube live from Fourth Space, which is located on unceded Indigenous lands in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. At Fourth Space, we work with our university community to mobilize knowledge by co-creating daily activities to examine research questions and projects in development here at the university. We are running this event as a live stream meeting, so we welcome your comments and questions with a raised hand or via the chat if you're joining by Zoom. For those of you in the space, if you'd like to participate, just let us know by raising a hand and we'll be sure to get a microphone to you. With that, it is now my pleasure to hand it over to your presenter today, Ian.
Okay, the theme for the rest of the day is Jekhipe, which means unity. And how I want to approach this is by looking at where we came from in the first place. Because unless we know where we came from, we cannot really know where we're going. And more than that, if we are not able to explain who we are, other people will do it for us. And they've been doing that forever. And the different hypotheses, theories about who are the gypsies, where did gypsies come from, are endless. And they are mostly absolutely stupid. Some make a bit of sense, but mostly they don't. And some of you are familiar with these already, that we come from inside the hollow earth, that we come from the moon, that we are Jews that hid during the medieval period because of discrimination, and then came out of the caves they were hiding in, all covered in dirt, which is why we're brown, and silly things like that. And also that we're not a real people at all, that we are a composite made up of the scrag ends of European criminal groups, and our language is a mishmash of slang words from different European criminal jargons and so on. It's no secret that our ancestors started out in India. What happened was that information gradually got lost from group memory, but it was still there. It was still there in the 1500s, because we have, to my knowledge, three different independent accounts of Romanis being asked, who are you, where are you from? And being able to say, from India. But as I say, that disappeared over time, which laid open the way for other people to tell us who we were and where we came from. And two exonyms, two externally applied names, got stuck. In particular, there's a whole bunch of them, but the two that stuck were Egyptians and the hands-off people, the Tsingani, don't touch, hands off, which was a label probably that was applied in the first place to the Manichaeans, whose Christian sect was also very exclusivist. In other words, it excluded non-Manichaeans. Don't get too chummy if you're not a Manichaean. And that is a characteristic of Romani behavior too. And so it's easy to see how a nickname, oh, those are the don't touch people, don't try and get too chummy. And then the Egyptian one, there's various explanations for why we were called Egyptians and Pharaoh's people and so on. But none of these labels, Tatar, for example, there's another one, Bohemians, being called by the last place we were at the time of being asked, who are you? Where are you from? The question must have been, where are you from? Well, we've come into France from Bohemia. Oh, then you're Bohemians. Even today, 150 years later, Romani Americans, at least the Vlach groups, are subdivided into the Grecuria and the Argentinuria, not because they came from Greece or from Argentina, but because that was where they passed through on their way to North and South America. Where have you come from? Argentina. Well, then you're Argentinians. And these names are still there today. But of course, they're not identity names. They're not endonyms, certainly. They're not, they're externally applied names, even by other Romani groups. So the question is, or the issue is, we need to know our own history. And just as much as we need to know our own history, the non-Romani world also has to know our history. They have to know who we are so they can stop controlling our identity and telling us who we are and what we are called and what we should be called. So what I want to talk about now is what the general consensus is coming to be about our origins. But I'll give you a bit of historical background other than the silly explanations. The breakthrough came in the middle of the 18th century when a theology student from the Austro-Hungarian Empire, from a town called Győr in what is Hungary now, was attending the University of Leiden. And the story is that he came from a wealthy family that employed Romani-speaking laborers on the estate. And he picked up some of the language by hanging out with these guys. And then on an occasion in Leiden, and I went there myself and checked out as much as I could. On one occasion, he was in presumably the student union room, and there were 3 students from India in the same place. And he went and sat with them, I guess, went and joined them for some reason and was listening to their conversation and noticed that they were speaking or using words that he recognized from the Romani he had picked up back home. And he must have made arrangements to meet with them more than just this once, because supposedly he managed to get a list of 1,000 words in Romani, which he then took back with him to Győr and read them all off to the folks there. No, he got a list of Romani words back home and read the list to these Indians. I got it backwards. And they understood everyone clearly, with ease. And immediately that signals something is wrong here, because there are not, as far as we know, 1,000 Indian root words in Romani. There's maybe 800 or 900, but it's not 1,000. It may turn out to be 1,000. But in any case, they also were supposed to have been speaking Sanskrit, if anything, and they came from the south coast of India and supposedly spoke Dravidian languages, which are not related to Romani at all, language like Tamil and Sinhalese and what have you. And even if they were speaking Sanskrit or Prakrit, those are old and Middle Indic languages. They're not modern Indian. A list of Hindi words, you'd have a fair chance of seeing lookalikes, but not looking at, comparing with older Indian words. So there's some fudging here of the story. And the story gets worse when you find out that he actually is not on the student list for the University of Leiden at all. And it may have been 3 other people from a different family who were there. And it doesn't matter. The details don't really matter, because the end result is what does matter. And that is that the story that these Zigeuner, because they're using German in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, these Zigeuner speak a language from India. The thinking back then was, well, if you speak an Indian language, you must be an Indian. We know, of course, that makes no sense whatsoever. Languages are not transmitted genetically. They're acquired socially. Nevertheless, the assumption was a right one, but it was not a very scientific one. This information was passed on to somebody else who was, the guy involved, Stefan Valli Stefan, was not a linguist. He didn't know what to do with this interesting information, and he gave it to a friend who was, but the friend sat on it, didn't do anything with it, until 16 years later. This is supposedly 1760, this is happening. He gives it to the editor of the Vienna Gazette, La Gazette de Vienne, a guy called Georg Prey. And the editor published the list. We haven't been able to find the list. But in 1776, in the Vienna Gazette, the list, or some of the list, was printed, plus the observation that the Zigeuner are really from India. And this came at a crucial time in the development of Western thought, because we are into the period of the Enlightenment. We've got overseas colonization going on. We've got Western Europeans encountering other kinds of human beings, looking different, speaking non-European languages with different religions, different cultures. And this Western desire to categorize and label was growing very quickly, and we get the emergence of disciplines like botany and zoology and linguistics that started around this time. And so when we jump over into the early 1800s, interest in who the Zigeuner are started to flourish with a small group. But because we have this disenfranchised, marginalized, non-white, odd population here in Europe from India, now we know. Why are they here? What made them leave? When did they first get here? Do they have their own country back there? And so on. It just raised a lot of questions. And so we start to get academic investigation into, to try to explain who the Zigeuner really were. And one of the earliest explanations was that the Romani word for a person being Rom is like the Indian word Dom, and the Domba were a low jati in the caste system who did menial jobs and were entertainers and so on. And this is, and they handled the disposal of rubbish and those sorts of low jobs, which is what the Zigeuner were seen to be doing in Europe. And so the connection was, well, these people are just doing what they did in the first place back home. And that's why they're even called Rom, because they are dumb. And that got into the conventional wisdom. And then in 1830, a British military man called Marriott published an article in which he claimed to have discovered the story of why they left in the first place. And he found the story in the Book of Kings, the Shahnameh, which was actually written in the 11th century, but described part of Persian history from the 5th century. And the story, which is probably true because it turns up in a couple of unrelated places, very similarly accounted for. One story says 10,000 Indians, another one says 12,000 Indians, but the story was that the Shah of Persia, his daughter was engaged to an Indian king or an Indian prince called Shankar. And Shankar was in Persia with his father-in-law and noticed that the Bahram's subjects all had long faces and looked unhappy and needed cheering up. So he said, when I go back to India, and significantly, he was a king of a place called Kannauj. And Kannauj has turned up again in one of the current theories about where the language actually started. I don't personally agree with it, but Kannauj as a place has reemerged. Anyway, Shankar said, I'm going to send you a whole bunch of musicians to cheer up your subjects, which, as I say, probably did happen. But the story continues that after a year, even though Bahram gave them, I think, a buffalo each or an ox each, but apparently they ate all the animals and weren't doing a good job, and so Bahram drove them away, said, go away, you're not doing a good job. And that was the end of the story in the Shahnameh. And what the story doesn't tell you is what happened to those 10 or 12,000 Indians who then left Persia. So Marriott, or Harriet, not Marriott, Harriet said, well, obviously, instead of going back to India, they just kept on moving in the northwest, towards the northwest, along the coast of the Caspian Sea and through Armenia, Anatolia, up, and eventually into Europe over time. And that became the story repeated over and over and over again. And I have a book that's less than 2 years old that tells that story. But it's the wrong story. It may be the history of the Dom people. And there are reasons for thinking that may be the case, linguistic reasons, which I'll come back to. So that stayed the story for a long time. But then, maybe 25 years ago, a small group of us, including Ronnie Lee, who we will be remembering on Thursday afternoon. He was one of our little group who started to re-examine our history. And the procedure was to examine the vocabulary of the Romani language. When you deal with lexicons, with vocabularies, it's easy to divide words into semantic groups, and that simply means all the words that have to do with one topic. So all the words having to do with agriculture form a semantic group. All the words having to do with metalworking form a semantic group. And there is a strikingly rich semantic group in the Romani lexicon of military terms, terms having to do with warfare. Very few that have to do with agriculture or farming, but quite a lot that have to do with warfare. Words for weapons, a word for sword, for example. The word for a spear. Now, semantically, the word for a spear now means the word for a spit. When you spit meat over a fire, must put on the boost. But the original word was a spear because you stick it through. So it was a weapon to start with. We have 3 native words. When I say native, I mean Indian words for metals. Only 3 of the metal names are Indian. One is gold, one is silver, and one is iron. All the other names, bronze, tin, copper, these are not Indian words. These are words picked up later on from Armenian, Greek, and so on. But the word for iron, sastri, doesn't originally mean iron, it means weapon. The Indian word for iron, lohar, is not in Romani. So an iron weapon became, the word for an iron weapon became the word for iron. But the other semantic set for metalworking, as I say, are not words from day one. And this also opens a window into the social position of those early ancestors, because they acquired their metalworking skills, blacksmithing and so on, outside of India. There may have been obviously some metallurgists in the mix, but those skills, even words for an anvil and a hammer and so on, these are not words brought out of India. They are words picked up later on. So now we've got words, including the word gajo, which traces back to a Prakrit word that means something like, not exactly peasant, but it means a non-military person, a person who lives on the land, a homeowner and so on, but like a civilian. And I know that in parts of Europe, maybe you can confirm this, sometimes gaje are referred to as civil. Have you heard that?
I use that.
Okay. Now, is that something new or is it a memory? I suspect it's something new, but it's an interesting parallel, a military, non-military. But it extends further, the word for set up camp, the word for pull down a camp, and so on. So given this link with some military aspect in the history, where do we go after that? If we look at Indian history, there's military activity from day one. So how can we pinpoint a place in time? Well, let's come back to the language itself. We have to dismiss the Bahram Gur story, which would have our ancestors leaving India in 400 and something. If they had, they would have left speaking, and let's assume for the moment, we're talking about one existing original language in India, which I'm going to argue against in a minute. But let's say that's what it was. It would have left with 3 grammatical genders, the way all your Slavic languages have, like German has, masculine, feminine, neuter, the way Latin. It doesn't. Romani has 2 genders. If you have studied basic historical linguistics, you know that Indo-European languages and other languages, but Indo-European languages have gone through stages of development. So in the case of English, we can talk about Old English, Middle English, Modern English, Old French, Middle French, Modern French, and so on. Each period of time is marked by changes, particularly in the grammar and the pronunciation. One of the most obvious features of shift between Middle Indic and New Indic or Modern Indic is the loss of the neuter gender. It doesn't mean all of the neuter nouns disappeared, it just meant they got reassigned, either to masculine or feminine. That's what happened around the year 1000 AD. And this is not hypothesis, this is well documented in Indian nological linguistics. You can find this information anywhere you look. So, speakers of Romani, or the ancestors of the language that was to become Romani, could not have left earlier than about 1000. So that's the bottom end of a window in time. For the other end, so we get a complete window, we have to look and find out where the first recorded appearance of people that we assume are our ancestors showed up in the West. And we're looking at something between, let's say, 100 AD and 1300 AD, perhaps a little bit earlier. So we've got a fairly narrow century, maybe between 1 and 2 centuries, to account for between leaving India and showing up in the West. Take the dates, take the military stuff, and put them together. What military activity was going on during this time frame? And we find, of course, the attempted expansion of the Ghaznavid Empire under Mahmud of Ghazni, a series of invasions into the northwest of what is India now, to expand his empire and to spread Islam. And over almost a quarter of a century, there was raid after raid, most of which were victories for Mahmud. Which is why, incidentally, Afghanistan and Kashmir, Pakistan is Islamic because of that. During those incursions on the part of the Ghaznavids, the Indian kings, and we have to think of India not as one big united country with one ruler. We've got areas with regional kings, would put their own troops together to try and resist these incursions. And we have to look at the composition of military armies, medieval military troops. And they consisted of service providers as well as the actual warriors. Camp followers who went with the fighting force to feed them, to fix their wounds, to set up the tents, to take down the tents, mend the broken armor and weapons, outnumbering the actual fighting force. But what's important here is that although the troops were all men, the service providers were men and women, and we need to remember that because we have the female genetic component that is absolutely essential in all of this story. While Mahmud was fighting India to the southeast, he was also trying to extend his empire in a northwesterly direction against the Seljuk Empire, another big, powerful, multi-ethnic Islamic empire. And there was a category of slaves at that time called gulams. And gulams were slave soldiers. That's how they're referred to in English. We've taken you as a prisoner. Now you must fight for us or we'll kill you and your kids. So we've got a lot of Indians taken captive, being forced to fight for the Ghaznavids, who are defeated in, I think, 1038, in Dandakan, I think, I forget the little details. And of course, the Seljuks immediately release the Indian soldiers and take them over on their own side. And the soldiers are happy now to fight with the victors, who then keep spreading, and they take over the kingdom of Armenia in 1071. There seems to have been a period of staying there for some time. because there's a whole bunch of Armenian words in the Romani language. And supposedly the first contact with Christianity, because the word for Easter in Romani is an Armenian word. The word for incense, sum, is an Armenian word. The word for a godfather, which is a Christian category, is an Armenian word. And there was presumably some intermarriage, interbreeding with Armenians. My DNA result has a whole bunch of Armenian in it. I didn't know that until I got my DNA results. Nobody ever talked about that in our family because it probably happened 1,000 years ago. So now we are right at the far end of Anatolia, which is pretty much Turkey on a modern map. But it's not Turkey, it's the Byzantine Empire, it's Byzantia. It's a Christian, a multi-ethnic, multilingual Christian empire, the official language of which was medieval Greek. And after the Indian lexical component in the language, the next most numerous words in Romani are Greek words. And even the Romani grammar was very much affected by medieval Greek. In fact, we could almost say that Romani is Indian/Greek structurally in many respects, especially the what I've called in my stuff the athematic grammar, the non-Indian grammar. Like when we say, for those of you who know the language, at least in Vlach, if I want to use a verb using the native grammar with a native verb, let's take me dicau. Dicau is I see, and if I wanted to say I saw, I can just take the root dik and stick in an L. Sometimes it would be a D. That would just, for the sake of the sound. And then another ending. So diklim would be I saw. That's native grammar, thematic grammar. But with words which are not native, you do it differently. So let's take vol, which is Romanian, meaning to love. First of all, I would say voliv, not volav. And then to make it a past tense, I'd have to say vol I sar de em. So you've got all this stuff in there that you would never do with a native word. And like I said yesterday, when people are speaking Romani here in North America, they automatically know which grammar to stick a new word in. It just is there, buried. So at the same time, and I think this is where probably Orhan and Christo can elaborate, the Islamic world is spreading, and another Turkic, not necessarily Turkish, because there are many Turkic groups who are not Turks in the narrow sense. But we've got the Osmanli, the Ottoman Turks, who establish a sultanate called Rum at the end of the Byzantine Empire, the Christian Empire. And gradually it expands towards the west. The Byzantine Empire shrinks, it's getting pushed off the map. Eventually, in 1453, Constantinople falls, becomes Istanbul, and Romanese move on, and obviously not just Romani people, but all kinds of people are moving out of Anatolia up into the Mediterranean area, bringing with them wisdom from the Near East, the Middle East, mathematics, science, a lot of scientific stuff learned through Islam. And that feeds into Western Europe. At the same time, access to the trade routes in the Far East are blocked off. Instead of going through the Middle East through the Silk Road out to the Indies, Cathay, and trading in that direction, which brought wealth to Eastern Europe, which by now had been seriously depleted through the Crusades. There was a huge gap in the workforce, which the newly arriving Romani people filled. There was lots of work when the Romani ancestors arrived. But at the same time, the Europeans, and now the Western Europeans closest to the ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, have to find another way to get around the Muslim world, to get back to their trading centers in the Far East. And this begins the voyages of exploration, the maritime expansion, which started out as voyages of exploration, just trying to circumvent the Middle East, but which end up colonizing other parts of the world, pirating wealth from overseas. So we've got the brain power coming into Europe, and now we've got all the gold from the Americas coming in, paying for the Renaissance. And all of these things are connected historically. And into all of this come Romani people, or the ancestors of Romani people. If we now come back and look at the language again, there's so much of the history and clues are in the language. And when I used to teach Romani in my classes, I used the metaphor of an onion, because an onion is built layer upon layer upon layer. And the heart of the Romani Purum is Indian. All the basic words are clearly Indian. Come, go, sit, stand, big, small, they're all Indian words. It's just the same. But then there is another layer of Dardic words, which are separate from Indic, but closely related. And then there is a small number of words from Burushaski. Now, Burushaski is what's known as a language isolate. That means, just like Basque, it has no other relatives on the planet. The only people who speak Burushaski are Burushaski people. But it's only spoken in the Hunza valleys, high up in the Himalayas. But what are those words doing in Romani? Well, to come out of India towards the West, and remember, we're looking at 1,000 years ago. We really have to examine history as well as we can in the time we're talking about. We cannot use our modern view of the world when we're talking about a millennium ago. There were only a number of ways to move out of India into, let's say, Afghanistan and out to the West, through passes in the Himalayas. And not all of them would accommodate whole armies. So which armies? And I've worked with an Indian scholar, an Indianist, who knows a great deal about this. And if anybody wants to read the account of ways that our ancestors could only possibly have moved as a large body out of India, I'm happy to send you that article. Anyway, words picked up along the way on our onion also point to the root, because then we get a big chunk of Persian. There's lots of Persian words in Romani. Now, Persian was at the same time the administrative military language of the Indian armies and the Persian armies, obviously the Persian armies, but it was also the court language in India. So like Urdu, and the word Urdu, which has given the English word horde, you know, a horde of people, actually is the word, a Turkish word that means an army camp. So there's that army connection once again. Urdu is very much like Hindi, except Hindi, first of all, it's written in Devanagari, not in Jawi, not in Arabic letters, and it's Hindu with lots of Sanskrit, and Urdu is Islamic with lots of Persian and Arabic. But that's not what's so interesting. It's the military bit that's interesting. I'm picking bits out of my memory here to build a picture. Those troops were recruited in different parts of northwestern India. And we know that because of the words they are that we can match in our language with their languages. When those troops were assembled in camps, in hordes, to resist the Ghaznavids, they were Indians speaking a variety of different Indian languages, related languages certainly, but different languages. And they had to work out a common lingua franca and a military koine. A koine, you probably know the word already, it's a compromise, the easiest version of a language that can reach the most listeners. And what we find to strengthen this hypothesis, because this is only a hypothesis, this is not necessarily fact, do keep that in mind. But Romani has synonyms. Sometimes we've got 3 words for the same thing. Different words that mean wash, different words that mean sing. From different, traceable to different Indian languages, but all showing up in Romani. So we had a selection, a choice of Indian words to express a concept, because we've got a whole bunch of speakers of different Indian languages, including the camp followers, the service providers. They're all speaking their languages, working out amongst themselves, coming up with a compromise. They're moving out of India. Within India, you have stricter ties or restrictions on who you can marry within your caste, within your jati. But what we see in Indian populations outside of India today, we have huge outside populations of people of Indian descent in East Africa, in Trinidad, in Mauritius, in North and South America, especially North America. And what has happened to class and caste barriers outside of India, now being a minority as Indians, not a majority, being an Indian of any kind overrides, well, you are high caste and I'm not. I'm going to marry you because you're an Indian. And presumably something like that happened the further away from India these Indians, soldiers and followers, got, and the more that time went by. And then when we get quite far away from India and there's intermarriage with Armenians and Greeks and other groups, there are words in Romani from Caucasian languages. We got 3 words from Georgian. Yeah. The word, this word came up yesterday, the Persian word for the Caspian Sea is deryav. And imagine coming out of the northwest of India, totally landlocked, never having seen a huge body of water ever, never having seen an ocean, and then suddenly the Silk Road goes along the edge of the Caspian and there is an ocean. And that word now becomes applied to huge bodies of water, but it's a clue to the route.
Would you like to refresh you with some informations that last time when I was in Iran?
Yes.
And make kind of research how these people are cut off from us, Roma, from Europe. Then I find out something incredible. Allah Verdi Khan was a statesman in Iran that time, sometime in 16th century. And Allah Verdi Khan has made a small army with Romani people in 16th century, and he defended Iran from Portuguese. He was actually from Georgia. And people still refer to Allah Verdi Khan. He is a Georgian who went to Persia and be, as we call today, a philanthropic, because he was extremely rich person and he loved to make bridges. So I went to Shiraz and I saw the bridge that he was supporting to be built. Many Roma in Iran, and the Romani village in Iran with Zargars, when they go to Shiraz, they kiss the beast of Allah Verdi Khan because he is Rome. But unfortunately, this in Iran is not such a topic that the history of Persia would consider this account as person who was actually from India, because his name is a combination of Turkic, but also India. Khan, you know what means that. So he's a Tagar, the king.
King Tagar.
And when you speak about those Roma, when we went through Persia, today in Iran there are very considerable events that Roma, Zargars in Iran, they consider highly as their own specific religion, which is very much related to Indian habits and traditions, like coming from the spring to, actually from winter to spring, Ederlezi. And for Ederlezi, the St. George's Day, as modern people say, I was shocked to see in India how people celebrate the spring and how the Roma from Persia, especially from Khorasan, they do very, very similar traditions. They actually say that yes, we are not originally from here, and they don't answer that it is origin from India. Very small number of Roma in Iran, in Persia. They have a knowledge about the origin, and usually, very interestingly, they are related to their brothers in Pakistan, but not in India, because of the language setup. For me, it was very also good to see how they speak Romani, the using of locative. And that was so good, kind of refreshment for me. And
we're just at the tip of the iceberg in this story of our people.
yeah,
There's so much still that we don't know. The language comes together during these sedentary periods of time when where choices have to be made about what will end up being what we call this. We've got 3 different words for this. Are we going to keep 3 different words? Well, I don't know. Sometimes yes. Sometimes yes. Generally, languages don't like exact homonyms. I would ask my students, is a bucket the same thing as a pail? They're not just 2 words for the same thing for most English speakers. If you think about it, you associate a bucket in one situation and a pail in another, because we do that with words. We make them more specific. We talked about that with the pukarao and so on. Anyway, let's not forget the theme of the session, which is unity. We've got a population of Indian descent already. The onion is picking up other stuff. Now we've got endless Greek. And we've got a movement out of Anatolia up into Europe. And there are a couple of theories about the direction of leaving Anatolia. One is that it was crossing over where Istanbul is, just walking across to the European side. Another is going through the Greek islands. And another, Nikolai Georgi believed that the route was from the other end of Turkey and up around down into the Balkans. I doubt that happened. It's possible that some people did go off in that direction on their own. It's unlikely, just as the Calais in Spain like to think that their ancestors crossed into Spain via North Africa. But the Calais dialect that they speak has Slavic words in it and Hungarian words and so on. So they must have gone through Europe rather than through North Africa. Based on dialectology, linguistics, it looks as though there were 3 distinct moves out of Anatolia into Europe. And it looks as though the earliest group, which includes the northern Romani dialects like Sinti and Spanish Caló, were the first people to move into Europe and to go furthest. Then they were followed by people who speak Central type dialects. And then in came those who were kept in the Balkans, in what today is Romania and that area, Transylvania and Bulgaria, all in the deep Balkans, because there was plenty of work for them to do. I mentioned the Crusades had depleted the workforce, and so when they came in with skills that the Europeans didn't have, metalworking ones especially, they picked up in the Byzantine Empire, brick making, and we can imagine that the demand for their skills became excessive to the point that they started to move on up into Europe to get away from the demands being placed upon them. Because at this time, we get those who had previously been employees of the landowners, laws coming in to make them the property of the landowners so that it was illegal to leave. And once you become property and laws start to be written into the civil code saying a Tsigan is a slave, and a slave is allowed this, that, and the other, and rules early on from Moldavia and Wallachia, making the people slaves. And this is why we've got a population, in Dani, which is the biggest, because it had been kept in one place for centuries. And then when slavery was abolished, it was abolished briefly in the late 1830s and very quickly reinstituted with, I think, a Turkish-Russian alliance. So probably those people who were briefly freed may never have known they'd been freed. Those who found out that they were freed for a couple of months, the next time abolition came in 1856, people got away as far as they could. I'm only picturing, trying to put myself in that situation. Well, they told us we were slaves and then changed their mind. Are they going to do it again? Let's get out of here. And so we get Vlach-speaking Romani people moving to the closest foreign border when they could. And we have the Serbaya who came, and the Machoaya who came westwards. Călăraș mostly went into Russia. I'm simplifying. There were other groups besides these, but these are the biggest. And spreading out, we've already got Romani groups out in the rest of Europe, showing up in the records just about everywhere by the early 1500s. But they are already separated by hundreds of kilometers and hundreds of years as time goes by. So I think I said this yesterday, the Calais in Finland and the Calais in Spain have been separate from each other for practically their entire time as a people in the West. So it's obvious that there's no sense of unity except from a social perspective. Well, we are both being called gypsies. We are both being treated like this. We are both being romanticized or devilized, criminalized in the literature. We have a lot in common. But what we have in common is what the Yado, the Gajikani, Lumia, the non-gypsy world, has forced upon us. And when I was talking about the core of direct retention, this is what we have to focus on, that what brings us together, not the non-core acquired words, cultures, intermarriage, all of that, that makes us different from each other. But unless we know our history, we cannot understand that. And it comes down to education. And I will repeat, and then I'm going to shut up and talk about this. I repeat that we, first of all, have to be educated about our own selves, who we are, where we come from, why we're here, why we were subjected to slavery and genocide and all kinds of other stuff. We have to know that, first of all, as a shared experience. They did it to us because of who we are. We're not a random bunch of people. In the Holocaust, only Jews and Romanis were selected for extermination following the final solution. There was the Endlers in der Zigeunerfrage, Endlers in der Judenfrage. There were no other final solutions of other viciously victimized groups. But if you look at the literature, Hitler's motive was to create a pure Aryan master race and to cleanse the Aryan gene pool. And clearly, Jews and Romanis have non-European origins and needed to be exterminated as contaminants, contamination. Also targeting, for example, homosexuals. This was seen as a genetic problem. It needed to be eradicated. So it's these common experiences which we have to explain as being from the outside, not self-caused, that unite us. At the same time, we have to speak more loudly against the stereotype of us as romantic thieves, stealing babies, cursing people, singing and dancing all day long with no shoes on. We provide an escape for the 9-to-5 world. They can run away and be gypsies. In my book, I talk about the Walt Disney magazine for children that talks about a disease called gypsyitis. And it's a disease you should be happy to get because it means running away and dancing in the flowers and being happy if you get gypsyitis. Now, what a thing to be teaching small children whose ideas are still being formed. But what do we do about that? We need a media watch. We need to protest loudly. We need to bring lawsuits where we can against discrimination. I said this the other day. We had a big Zoom about reparations for slavery in Romania. A big group of us based with the Amensa people, in Bucharest. And I said, the way to fight in a capitalist world where money is everything, if a shopkeeper refuses to serve you, go to a lawyer, file a lawsuit. Discrimination is illegal. File a lawsuit and sue that person for as much as you can possibly get. It's not going to make him love you, but he's going to make it damn sure that he's not going to do it again. And when that kind of overt discrimination, other people actually observing Romanis being refused service, if they're not seeing this overt discrimination, it doesn't become so real for them. And the younger people will grow up not having seen that. And gradually, and I say gradually, that sort of thing, one hopes, will diminish. But we have to be educated and able to do that. I got into an argument with George Soros years ago in Switzerland. He was funding, remember that?
Of course.
He was funding efforts, artistic efforts, and spending millions of dollars and producing. The results were very largely little books of poetry. And there'd be stacks of these little paperback books of poetry in Romani, nice stuff. And I said, well, you know, people aren't reading this and they don't really need it. You can say poems all the time, sing songs to each other. You need books in Romani that talk about birth control, talk about how to start a small business, talk about how to find a lawyer, talk about how to stand up for the rights you have like any other citizen of whatever country you're living in. If you are a citizen of the country, you are protected, just like the Gaze are protected. But unless you know how to handle a situation where you've been wronged, you're just gonna let it slide. Okay, I've said enough. Let's. This is why, to wrap it up, this is why we have developed as families, and then the smaller group, the Vița, well, even before then, the Compania, and then the Vița, and it doesn't really go beyond the group identified by the way we speak to each other, what kind of Romani we use, and that's where it ends. And we have to go beyond that now and say, yes, we do speak differently. We do have different interpretations for things, but we're more than that. We've got to look at what it is. It's like what Jussi said about now living in England, and first of all thinking that Ramicals, they're not really Romani people. They're too Englishified. But the more he got to know them, the more he realized, using the same techniques that I'm talking about, well, what do we have in common? Forget about the things that we don't share. Let's talk about what we do share. We have a concept of ritual impurity. All groups have that. Magaripe, Mokadi, Marime. This is from India. Well, let's talk about that. What else? I asked you whether you knew about Lolidori. Of course, you know what a Lolidori is. It's even called that, or something like that. At least Dori.
Do you think that the Indian connection can play a role about our unity?
We need a country, Romanistan. We need a country to talk about. I don't think we can see India as our country today because too much time has gone by. Although Madam Gandhi said that whenever we want to become Indian citizens, which is very difficult for foreigners to do, we can become easily Indian citizens because we are part of the diaspora, Indian diaspora. I represent our people with an organization called GOPIO. Have you heard of that?
Of course.
It stands for Global Organization of People of Indian Origin. And that includes us.
Yes.
So this tie with India is very, very important.
You know that Sushma Swaraj, late Minister of Foreign Affairs, she continued what Madame Gandhi has been talking about the recognition of Roma as Indian diaspora.
But there's so many Romanis who say, I'm not Indian. I'm not like the guy who works in the 7-Eleven. You know, they don't want to know. What do we do? I mean, comes back to education. I keep talking about education. Christo, you had a comment.
I just wanted to say that nowadays many Roma refuse to be called that they are coming from India. There are two types of Roma. One group of the Roma are evangelic Roma who pretend that we are from Israel and we don't have anything to do with India. And I had some fights with this kind of evangelic Roma. They were accusing me that I'm lying about the origin of Roma, that I'm making up that the Roma came from India, but originally we came from Israel, because about us is written in the Bible, and we are holy people from Holy Land, exactly like the Jewish people. The second group of people, like our brother Selahattin Kruezi, I recently had a fight with him on Facebook about this, that I'm lying and I don't know the real theories about the origin of Roma, and I'm lying about this, that the Roma came from India, because actually the Roma came from Egypt. And he's the one who discovered new documents, new facts, which show that the Roma are coming from Egypt. And my question was, how did you discover these new facts when you don't speak Arabic, you don't read Arabic, and you don't have any scientific background, and you are not familiar with any scientific methods to do this kind of research? And then he wanted to continue this exchange of messages in the messenger, and I said to him, sorry, I don't have time to waste my time with stupid people. Go and do whatever you want, but don't disturb me with your crazy ideas about our Egypt background. So why I'm telling all these things? Because it will be very difficult to use the Indian background to unite ourselves between, unfortunately, the evangelic Roma are not only in Europe. The latest fight which I had was with someone from Latin America. I don't know the guy, who was writing to me in Facebook again. And it will be absolutely impossible to unite the Latin American Roma who pretend to have a Jewish background and coming from Israel, European evangelic Roma, and there are other groups of Roma who are extremely high Muslimized, and they are believing that, and those are Roma in Kosovo, in Macedonia, we have those kind of Roma, that actually we are first of all Muslim, and this is our real nature, and this that we came from here or there, it's not so important. So I think that this idea of uniting Roma under the flag of India and under the name of India will not bring any success.
I am not speaking about that.
I'm
not saying that, but I'm saying...
I didn't say that you said that.
No. I am the one who is promoting that we have origin from India, because those facts that are existing...
Yes, this is what I'm saying.
And as much we know our history, as much we are educated about us, then we got kind of a real picture, one. Second, those religions are playing very hard role.
Yeah.
And Christianity and Islam
Yeah.
and so on.
The question is,
let me say to you,
I'm sorry.
Maybe you didn't know, Cruzy is from my town. That man makes migration of Copt people from Egypt to Macedonia, Kosovo, and so on. He supposed that those are Roma, but it's not true at all, historically. And we analyze the language. The language is not Romani at all.
But there are lots and lots of people in the world who are saying, don't confuse me with facts. I know what I believe.
not only that, the hardest problem, the biggest problem is this, that some Roma groups don't want to educate themselves. They don't read, they don't believe in this, these are not theories. They simply blame us that we are making up the Roma history. I say that these are historically developed facts, that Roma came from India, because there are genetic investigations, research findings, there are linguistic findings, and all these small facts actually put together the whole picture of the ethnic background of Roma and the origin of Roma. But yeah, the problem is how you are going to educate someone in something if he doesn't want to do that, and if he doesn't believe in that, and he's fighting about it. How I'm going to change the mind of Selahattin Kruesi when he believes that the Roma came from Egypt, and he's spreading those lies among the Turkish Roma, for example, in Turkey. And the people think that he's a great expert on Roma issues, and they believe him because he pretends that he's an expert on Roma language, expert on Roma history. He has his own theory of the origin of Roma. And this is absolutely impossible. Yeah.
That doesn't bother me. I mean, there are always going to be people like that. Look at who voted for Trump. You're never going to change people like that, but they are still a minority. And the number of educated young Brahmanis is growing. It's growing. And older people, generally, the older people are the ones that you're never going to change their minds. We concentrate on youth, and this is where changes are going to come.
Okay, is it me? All right. I've got a quite short question about Jekhipe. And I'll say the question, is it in fact really Jekhipe you're after, or is it Gitanipe, or are they both the same, more or less the same thing, or is there any tension between them? And the reason for this is I'm looking for your argument, which a very important and historical one, which basically is saying that only when we understand our commonalities and our differences, our original commentaries, or your original commonalities and differences, can we move forward in any kind of informed way towards unity. And this is very reminiscent of the medieval Catholic theologians like Peter Abelard and Thomas Aquinas, who tried to preserve the unity of European Catholicism, Roman Catholicism, by saying that knowledge will make you free. It's only when we understand the constraints on our actions that we can have any kind of freedom. And what you're saying, it is only when we understand these inherited constraints, not inherited, it's not a good word, but only when we can understand the original commonalities and the differences, can we build unity. But is that Jekhipe or is it Gitanipe, and is there any tension between them?
Well, You can have Jekhipe togetherness without unity, right? I mean, we've got Jekhipe right here, but not everybody agrees with what I've been saying. I don't think they're quite the same thing.
From my understanding, Jekhipe is unity, but as you see, the word Jekhipe is related to tan, to place.
Ektan.
Yektan. Jekhipe or Jekhipe, however, is related to a physical place, a land. Like this would happen, Jekhipe or Jekhipe, if one day will be a Romani-Stan. And yeah, we'll do that. but Professor Thomas, I was highly criticized by some European institutions and societies thinking about the place where Roma would live. I did speak about Romani-Stan and why not. Why not is that if Roma would organize Romani-Stan, their state, I believe some very powerful forces will bomb us to clean up the world, as happened in 1940s. The other thing, Roma to get into mainstream societies and having relations, especially economic relations, Roma might have organized an invisible state where Roma could develop their institutions. There is an initiative from some very rich Roma to organize World Roma Economic Forum and Roma Davos Conference. Some rich people, as I can say now openly here, that Mittal Steel, you might know who is, he was very interested in, he talked to the vice president of Kosovo, because I had a relation with the vice president. And there are now kind of how to build a chamber of commerce, because we Roma, we don't get a economic empowerment to build some institutions that are very much needed. I do believe on Jekhipe. I do believe that can happen this, but we have to find a format like a religion. We have to find the interest of the nation. Then we might move, but still did not appear economists, political persons like Jan Hancock, and so on. We need those Roma or even non-Roma who will help us to do what Afro-Americans did, what Africans did, what Albanians did. You see, Kosovo and Albania. Why? Because Kosovars were helped, empowered by USA, by European countries, and so on. And why this should be kind of a fear to talk openly about this, our unity. Yeah, we have to talk about it. And very good point today.
Yeah, there's someone over there wanted to make a comment.
Yeah, Jula or Rad.
Yeah.
Hello, Taven Sastetai Bachtale.
Me too.
Thank you very much for this amazing presentation, Kakoyanko, as well as to Orhan. Thank you very, very much. It's such an amazing experience listening to this. And thanks to Debbie as well for organizing this again and again. So I've got a couple of thoughts, and I would love to get your reflections on it, right? If you could both reflect on it, I would really appreciate that. First and foremost, let me just say that Nidhi again is here with us online in the chat box, as well as Punita from yesterday. And Nidhi said yesterday and is reiterating today that, and I'll read it, what we really need is an international task force of historians, linguists, cultural experts, sociologists to piece together early Romani, proto-Romani history. Should be led by Roma, but with Indian, Persian, Greek, and other scholars in Caucasus, Balkans, and Europe, who are experts in early medieval era. And Punita adds, Ketanipe Sizoralipe, Zor, right? Thank you very much for that contribution, guys. And on that note, I'm thinking, I already gave that question to you guys as well before as part of the same project last year when we had this session online, right? Was that last year? Am I right? Was it July last year that we had an online session preceding the Summer Institute? I'm just looking at everyone who took part in that. Debbie, Janko, you were also present. Orhan was also present on the chat functionality, and Christo and Hedina were presenting. That's the event I'm talking about, right? So there, I made a reference to a conversation with a solicitor in the UK, in Manchester, who comes from the northwest of India originally himself, from present-day Pakistan. And he also has very light skin, as well as his daughter, his family. To me, initially, he didn't look Pakistani, right? First, I thought he was actually a Roma when I first met him. And he was telling me that, you know, Jews, you and your family, you look like us, right? And I said, yeah, we are Pakistani. But he said, no, hold on a second. You also have lighter skin than I have, right? And he says, well, look, you know why that is? And he said, it is because of the Greek connection. I had my DNA tested, and I also have Greek. My ancestors have never migrated from India. They always stay there. I'm the first one to come from the Indian continent to the UK, right? They never came before me. So I'm just wondering, about that on the first hand, right? As we know, there was the Indo-Greek kingdom, right? That collapsed. When they arrived, they fought for another 5 centuries. And I'm thinking, you know, when people say, oh, Roma never went to war. But if I think, if that theory is true, that we may be related or descending from them, then there is a very logical explanation as to why we never go into war, because our ancestors fought through the war, or we may have had something to do with them in common. I understand that linguistically, it doesn't say that, but because there is a population in present-day Pakistan, as Ibrahim is his first name, explained to me to date, a large population with Greek heritage, right? And I would love to get your reflection on that. And then regarding Jekhipe, which is the subject of the presentation, I'm thinking that the core of Romani-Translation is being non-institutional, right? And if I think about the nation states, you also made a reference to that earlier today, Kakoyanko, it's a fairly recent institution, right? It was the Westphalian Peace Treaty when countries in the west of Europe agreed that we wouldn't carry on killing each other, and the interim solution they came up was nation states, right? Yeah. But look at how fragile this system is, right? It's a fairly recent system, right? And us, the Roma, right? Our nations are our families, right? And that's how it used to be always for all people on earth, right? and I'm thinking, you know, actually the world should learn from us, right? Because institutions for us always represented fear, right? Our whole culture is built around navigating through institutions, right? For centuries, right? And I'm really proud of that. I think this is amazing that we are still alive without a country, without an army, without money, right? And most of our people are very poor to date. And look at that. We're growing, right? So I'm thinking the way forward is not institutions, but a cultural unity, right? Understanding that Pachiv is present in all communities, whether consciously or subconsciously. Everyone sticks to Pachiv. This is what I learned, right? And this has been the biggest lesson for me in the UK, as I explained yesterday too. And the way to get that across is what we are trying to do with Maria: dramas, films, festivals, social network, right? So I would love to get your reflections on that. Thank you.
Well, you brought up two things that I wish I had myself. I'll take the last thing that triggered first. When I've spoken to children in schools, in Romani schools in Slovakia and Czechia, about pride, I talk about this history and I try to emphasize that as Romani kids, they have every reason to be proud of who they are because they represent a people that has survived against all odds. For 1,000 years, we're still here, still with our language and our identity. Even if it's fraying around the edges, the core is still there. And these are reasons to be proud of our adaptability and strength, given all of the obstacles that have been put in our way for centuries. And we're still here, and we still maintain paikiv in the family, respect for parents, respect for age. These are wonderful characteristics which are being lost in the mainstream culture. The other thing you touched upon I wanted to respond to was our history from the Indian side. And that's something else I looked into with, I think, Ranjit Naik and a couple of other Banjara leaders who have the same history as the one I outlined from their side, how numbers of their ancestors in the same, exactly the same time period were left to confront the Ghaznavids and never came home. And for a while, I reproduced the front page of a publication, a journal they had called Banjara Roma. And they would sometimes come to our conferences, and I know that our people have gone there to India too. So there's the same sort of history from that side, and we have to look. We cannot just interpret our history through Western European eyes. We have to look at the same story from the place of origin in this direction, and that we still have a lot to do in that respect. We need, first of all, people who can read the languages that these early accounts are written in, and who care about us. See, that's the other thing. We've got to find the scholars that Nidhi lists who are willing to devote their time and energy to working with us. So that's my response to that. We look at our history from the Indian side as well as the Western side. Yeah.
I think you know my answer, but the others doesn't know, so I will speak. One of the issues that in our unity we have to play is to build ideology. We did not succeed after 17th century when Europeans or the world has been organizing their ethnic states. That was a big disturbance for making a united Roma, or better, an educated Roma who will start to build, to counter actually all these differences that Europe had about the issue of the others. Because still, from that century, from 17th century, still, there is a problem, we and they. So there is no communication, there is no bridge, there is no political, economic relations among us. And then I try to find the answers in India. I do respect very much, and I do like very much to talk to those from India who are leaders in India. So I went to family of Pandit Nehru. I went to family of Gandhi. And there were some answers that how we can do this. And also in modern time, unfortunately, we did not build a think tank group to deal with these issues in a very serious way. I'm not recalling any militant action, please. I'm proud that we Roma, we have never led any war or we never organized terroristic groups, armed terroristic groups. We did not, because we know very well that for the war, Professor Hancock explained perfectly many times around of the world, we don't have exactly a word for the war. In our vocabulary, there is no such word. So that's why I went to Tushar Gandhi, who is the grandchild of the Gandhi, and asked him how we can use the Arjuna way and how we can use as well a Gandhi way about to work on our unity. I think it is a time, because I believe I am not alone among 20 million Roma, that we have really to sit down and to talk to governments, to talk to Europeans, to talk to Africans, Asians, to talk to United Nations again and again. This man devoted his life talking to the UN body. He was representative of the International Romani Union to UN. You were our first ambassador. Somebody has to continue this type of lobbying and so on. We have to have 100 projects as Miss Debbie organized this Institute summer. We have to have this. We have to have so many. There are hidden Roma linguists who are still ashamed to show their identity as a professor of the Romani language. And so, and in the end, my son Arjun, he went to school, he was 4. And the teacher pointed to him, why you have name Arjun? And he said, I'm Rom. So he said, how Arjun Rom? She didn't understand, the Dutch teacher didn't understand. And then, okay, fine. Everybody go now home. You come afternoon with your own flag. At home, we didn't have the Romani flag. We had the Indian one. And Arjun picked up the flag and he went back to school. He explained the origin with his 4, that his papa has cousins in India. And that is work that I do, first of all, with my family and large family. I'm proud to say here also that one of my uncles, he went to Nusret Sehar Soid to the Congress in 1971, and we are thought at home. We are Roma. And this kind of ideology that makes us proud.
So I'm next. First of all, thank you very much for the opportunity to give you a question, and thank you for your presentation. First of all, please confuse me, because I don't know. I know that I don't know nothing. Okay.
Oh, no.
First of all,
Not true.
yeah. So we know that people who know their history can very easy or can predict their future. It's a very important to say. And in this past 6 or 7 days, I realized that we have only 2 things: language and history. And we can do much more in the future for language and for history.
Right.
Everything what we do now in Montreal is, I believe, among us. you know, among Mascaramende, among Roma, among us. But we need to calculate and to mainstream people, to majority people. Why I am saying this? Because I really believe, and it's my question to both of you or to everybody, because language is a political issue. History, much more political issue. So because of that, I think that we need, first of all, we need to create a political power, political environment to do much more for language and for history. For history, I believe that we need to do, to build up our history, to make our heroes, to make stories, to make our superheroes, if we need, to make our, I don't know, to make our knights of round table. We just need to refer to majority history. What about England history, French history, I don't know, American history, and other histories? We have all served on the table. We need just to pick up good things and to left some bad things. But my directly question is about relation, what you think generally about relation between political power and history, like a tool of political power. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I'm a great believer in learning from the experience of others. And the population that comes to mind, possibly most like us, would be the Kurdish people. They don't have a country. They do, however, have a defined area on the planet. And they are a fighting force. We have neither of those things. We don't have a single place that's ours, and we don't have military or economic strength. So we're faced with really an uphill climb to become a political voice that anybody is going to care about. We're not a threat to territory. No country is afraid. Well, they will say so. I mean, the people in Slovakia and Hungary and other places say in 50 years it'll all be gypsies. Won't be any more Hungarians. They'll take over the country. That's not going to happen. So in reality, we are not a threat to anybody. That is the big puzzle, really, with the genocide. We were not a threat. You know, Hitler would argue that the Jews were a serious threat, not just racially, in quotes, but also economically and politically and everything else. He couldn't say that about us. All he could say about us was racist. So it wasn't a real threat, except a ideological one. We did have a place at the Economic and Social Council and the DPI, and we got all kinds of NGOs and so on. But one of the questions that has been asked, and I quote it in, I think in my early book, Pariah Syndrome, somebody asked the question, what have gypsies ever given to the world? Why should we even bother about people who don't contribute? Well, we have contributed more than perhaps people recognize or understand. But I think becoming a strong political entity is a long way off I don't want to be a protected group, like I don't know, like some tiny Amazonian people being protected by an organization, a humanitarian organization. I would hate to be, in a sense, a victimized group. But what are the alternatives? I mean, let's hear from some of you listening to all of this. How do we gain, given our present condition as a diasporic people in many different countries with many different amounts of availability to us, and by that I mean, let's say Romanis in Sweden can draw upon a lot more than, say, Romanis in Slovakia can. Much more governmental support and that sort of thing. So how do we, as a people, gather political strength and recognition? What do we do to do that? Christo.
Yeah. Oh,
Mike.
Well, I think that the situation of the Roma depends very much from the economic situation of the country where they live. This is nothing new, nothing unknown. And if we speak about the Roma in Bulgaria and in Slovakia and compare them with the Roma in Sweden or Finland, of course, there is huge differences between those 2, 3, 4 groups of Roma. And the question was about the political recognition, the political presentation of Roma. I think that after 1970s, the Roma showed in Europe quite a lot of power to get organized after the first World Congress of the International Roma Union. And until 1990s, although that the situation in East European countries under the communist time was quite difficult and they couldn't freely express their identity and they cannot pretend that they have the human rights, political rights, linguistic rights, and etc. After 1990s, we know that the situation it changed, but still this is not enough because still in many countries the situation of the Roma is so bad, and even it turned to be worse than during the communist time. For example, now in Bulgaria we have the neo-Nazi party, which is quite powerful in the government, and this is not only the one case in Europe. I mean, this is more or less the situation in Slovakia or in Czech Republic. There are neo-Nazi parties, and even in France when we speak. But I was thinking that little bit about this, that unfortunately there are not so many. Nidhi was mentioning in her comments about the need of putting together linguists, sociologists, and all kinds of experts and specialists to work together. And I think that if we see last 5 years or last 10 years, how many research were done together with Indian scholars in India and in Europe. Unfortunately, there are not so many cases like that. The last one which I remember, which was organized by Marcel Curtiade with the conference in Kanauch and visit to Kanauch. And after that, I don't remember any other events or any other scientist. It doesn't matter, sociologist, political scientist, or whatever, whoever, to do something about this, to prove that there is very good connections with India, and in some way that connections could bring kind of different level of status of Roma in European countries, that that the European countries can more visibly more, how shall I say it, more visible, see the visibility of Roma and Indian connections. So I think that one of the reasons for this very bad situation of the Roma is this, that there is no support from our motherland, fatherland, India, about this political situation. And although that with Orhan, we had a lot of conversations about this, how to build the bridges, how to bring this period of time when Indira Gandhi was very much trying to build the bridges between European Roma and India, how we can bring this back together. Unfortunately, for the time being, the results are not so big. And these are just some personal conversations with some researchers, some friends, some people who are interested in doing economical stuff with the Roma. And yeah, the political situation of Roma, if I have to summarize, depends very much from the economical situation, economical conditions of Roma where they live. And unfortunately, in most of the countries, this economical situation is not so great.
Yeah.
Okay. One quick commentary here, because then unfortunately we have to close. Already, it went fast. Got it. So I guess. Yeah, this question was written in conjunction with conversations with the young people. And I guess this will be a rhetorical question. In your presentation, you both have come out and said young Roma are the future and we need to get educated and where we come from, but this view fails to consider the barriers to entry that exist for young Roma and Romani descendants to participate in Roma society. We are a diverse generation of mixed bloods, heritages, religions, gender identities, and sexuality. We are carrying our ancestors' trauma on our backs and trying to do something with this trauma so that we don't pass it on to our kids, likely an even more diverse generation. Some of us were raised in the culture, some of us were raised outside of it. Some of us have our language or languages, some of us do not. By the definitions of older and more conservative Roma and scholars, we are tainted. We do not deserve love, acceptance, or to call ourselves Romani. If we are responsible for carrying forward the Romani-pe, do all of us who do not fit the traditional definition of Romani need to go away?
Can I add something? I just really don't like that word like war, you know? Most of war were provided by men. And, you know, I don't see that bringing our identity can be, you know, I don't want to be a nationalist, you know? I don't want to be that kind of person. In our community, there are different persons. And I think that, you know, the common thing is culture. And what you said, I totally agree. And also, I agree what you said, but, you know, war is not my word, to be honest.
Mm.
Thank you so much for joining us on the Zoom and in person. We're going to close up the Zoom now. We're closing up the space soon, momentarily. Thank you so much again. Have a good night.